for us, like innovation is really important, whether it's the product itself and making that as aspirational as possible, as easy to use and as ergonomic as possible, but also the service around it.
Today I'm going to be interviewing Nav, the founder of the Washing Machine Project.
Simply and truly, I was an engineer who fell in love with a very old problem. Our mission is really simple. We design, we manufacture, and we distribute manual washing machines. We always have to have the user at the front and center of all of our design.
It's not just clothes, it's dignity. It's about how you show up, it's your identity, it's how you feel as you go through the world. So it's not just about the fabric being clean, it's about how it makes that person feel as well.
People that don't have very much are the most innovative people that I've ever come across. For us, community is the way forwards. We can't do our work without community. We always say fall in love with the problem because the solution will always change. Start small with a real user insight, and then create your constraints and keep your ego out of it, and then you'll build something really beautiful.
Hi, I'm Chloe and I am one of the founders of Eighth Day, and we are an innovation and brand strategy agency, and I'm very excited to be talking at GIF this year. And today I'm going to be interviewing Nav, the founder of the Washing Machine Project. Hi Nav. To kick off, can you introduce yourself and share the journey that's led to you founding the Washing Machine Project? What was the spark that made you realise that laundry was an innovation with real social impact?
Well, it's really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really excited for the conversation ahead. And Nav means new in Punjabi, and I've always been obsessed with like new and innovative things, and from a very young age I would take apart appliances, not know how to put them back together again. So that used to make my mum really angry. But simply and truly, I was an engineer who fell in love with a very old problem. The problem was hand washing clothes. I was an engineer here in the UK. I was fed up of making vacuum cleaners. I found myself in India making cook stoves, and I met my next door neighbor, a lady called Divya, in India. And after seeing how much time and labor and effort went into hand washing clothes and how that was stealing opportunity from her, I promised to design something better for her, something more simple, something more affordable, and something off the grid. So that promise to Divya back in 2018 led to the formation of what is called the Washing Machine Project. And our mission is really simple. We design, we manufacture, and we distribute manual washing machines. These are called Divya washing machines that are co-designed with families that actually fit into their lives.
Lovely. And as a fellow engineer, I can appreciate your wanting to take things apart and put them back together again. I was a kid.
It's a pretty common trait.
Yeah, love the Lego set, building things
Exactly.
from scratch. And I found myself in a factory the same way building things. And I thought that you called it Divya after her. Was that because it's kind of really kept her as a person front of mind for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we work together as a team, my team are incredible. They work so hard. We always have to have the user at the front and center of all of our design, and what better way to commemorate that by naming it after the person that inspired the whole thing.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I was talking to a client recently and they were saying they invite in ChatGPT, they invite the consumer in and they've named it to make sure that they have that same behavior of always having the consumer front and center whenever they do anything. So they invite the consumer to a meeting and they're present. So I love that you've got that kind of
Very
initial
interesting.
front and center, because I think that's so important to remember the user. When we think about laundry, we often don't think about it as a social determinant of health and well-being, but it does play a really enormous role in our lives. I was doing a before this interview, and I read that even in the US, 1 in 5 children don't have access to clean clothes, and that makes them more likely to miss school. And it feels like that problem must be even bigger in some countries. And a lot of the narrative around culture at the moment is about making sure everyone has access to technology. But it seems like we still have access to really simple appliances like washing machines that aren't everywhere. Why is laundry such a critical issue for so many people in middle and low income countries?
Yeah, it's a huge, huge issue. Over 50% of the world still hand wash clothes. And unfortunately, it's mostly women and girls paying that time, health and opportunity costs, lost school, lost income, sore hands, back pain, joint pain, skin irritation, unsafe water. And a typical week means, hauling water, scrubbing, rinsing, boiling water, and drying those clothes, and repeatedly over and over again every single day. And they'll do that not only for themselves, but for the whole household, and sometimes for extended members of their family in their community. It's an invisible labor that really shapes their future, and it's unfair and it needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, how do people react when they hear that statistic of 50%? That is quite a big number.
Yeah, so that's actually the global statistic. When you just consider low and middle income countries, that's more like 85, 90% of those communities. So a huge proportion of the low and middle income countries still do that. And often it's because of inadequate appliances that are available, electricity constraints, water constraints, and the like. The statistic is unknown in the global north, so to speak, which is why we're really trying to drive this innovation, but also the kind of advocacy that goes around it.
Yeah, super interesting. And it's interesting that you talk about, what it takes them away from. When you remove the burden of, doing the washing by hand, what does that enable women and girls to do then in the countries that you're operating in?
Go to school, work, rest, spend time with family. These are all examples of stories of impact on our website of people that have used the Divya washing machine. Some of the stories are incredible. People are now paying for their education. Girls are going to school. Mothers are spending more time with their family. There's a community group that are now earning money off the machine to pay it forward with their family. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey so far.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite story that you could share?
One of the more recent stories that I read about was a lady called Aishwarya. She's 18 years old. She comes from a really impoverished background in South India, and her mother often has to decide whether to send her to school or stay at home, essentially. And she really wants to become a lawyer. She's really bright and brilliant, but that comes with lots of fees, and she needs to have time to study, but often she has to decide whether to study or spend time hand washing clothes. So we've given them a Divya washing machine. She now has more time to study, and she's just applied for a local college to do law, and she's been accepted. So really good example of Aishwarya having more time to study and focus on what she wants to do, which is really important. The Divya manual washing machine is the world's first flat packable washing machine. Its capacity is 5 to 7 kgs, uses 30 liters of water, and it's a drum inside of a drum. So it's all stainless steel, which means it's rust free, and it recycles at the end of life. And you crank it with your hand like this, and you basically put the clothes in a hatch at the top, and then you put your water and your detergent, and then you let it soak for a couple of minutes, wash for a couple of minutes, and rinse for a couple of minutes with some waiting periods. So we say, across half an hour, your washing is done, but you're only touching it for 5 to 6 minutes, essentially. So yeah, 5 to 7 kgs, which is about 25 pieces of clothes, which is the kind of average families' clothes usage in a week, essentially. It's got wheels, it's mobile, and it's got a spout at the bottom where you take the water out, and you can dispose of that water wherever you need to. But yeah, in the future, we're hoping to motorize this, make it solar, make bigger versions, smaller versions, and everything in between.
I work a lot with SC Johnson, who own a lot of pest control brands. And when I work with them, I find it's really easy for me to just come with my own biases that, mosquitoes are annoying if I'm at a barbecue. They're just kind of, disrupting my day. And I've got an abundance of solutions at my fingertips that I can just use. But often, when I think about mosquitoes in other countries, there are still children's lives being lost to mosquito-borne diseases because people don't have access to protection. And I think it's, we often bring our own biases to these things. And what I found was really interesting that SC Johnson recently launched a non-profit business to really tackle that problem. And they had to work with a lot of constraints because, it had to be a product that could protect an entire family. It had to work in a home that essentially wasn't sealed. So you can't stop the mosquitoes getting in. It wasn't as easy as, closing the doors. It was quite a porous home. And it had to be something that lasted a long time. And what was really interesting is that those constraints they had to operate within got them to really think about the project and the problem differently and how they operated. And they came up with this spatial repellent that you can just hang on the wall. It lasts for months. And it's just been approved by the World Health Organization as relevant as mosquito nets for solving that problem. And they faced a load of constraints when working with different cultures. Like, what were some of the things that you had to face when you started designing a solution? What were the biggest constraints you had to operate within?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to kind of innovate in a box, So we drew 4 constraints essentially. We assumed that there was no mains power available, minimum water needed. So 30 liters was our basic limit, and that was based on research. This is research that we've done in 15 countries with over 4,000 families now. So we know how people wash clothes, and try to remove our own bias from the data. And so, yeah, no power, 30 liters of water, ultra low cost and maintainable parts. So, if something breaks, we want people to repair it locally. So those are kind of the 4 constraints that we had. So designing with those constraints limited us, but also unlocked a lot of creativity and speed, because we could rule out stuff very quickly. And then, every component must be able to be sourced locally if something breaks, and it has to be serviceable. People need to take it apart and put it back together again. It needs to tolerate tough conditions, whether it's heat or variable water quality or dust. Or what we're optimizing for is, dignity, and reliability, not kind of a spec sheet metric or something like that.
Yeah, so you must have had a very interesting R&D brief to start with.
Yeah, the brief is always the most contentious point in our team. It's what raises the most questions about what to do and how do we start.
Yeah, but it shows the importance of why a great R&D brief at the start really helps you unlock new ideas because you don't have access to electricity freely, water's limited. I think that's a really interesting challenge. And I was wondering, do you think we can learn lessons from that? If you think about what's happening around the world, we're having electricity shortages across Europe. We're seeing water shortages, and it's often innovation in other countries that can learn lessons in more developed ones. Do you think we could learn anything from your experience of building, Divya?
Yeah, so 2 stories of that. So I found myself with my team in a conference room, and we looked to the side of the room, and there was 3 variations of a kettle. There was a small domestic kettle, there was a big kettle that was readily available for hot water that you could get from a tap, and then there was a water cooler that you could get hot water as well. All 3 of those things do the same job. They can give you hot water, and it really raised the question, well, what are we designing for? Who are we designing for? Even though, you could have the same output. So that was quite interesting starting point of, the kettle is a really good example of, how many people do you need this to be used by, who and where. And I have a friend called Nicholas Marchese, who's an amazing innovator that founded Orange Sky, one of the largest charities in Australia, and he's just produced a washing machine that has one button,
Yeah.
essentially, and that's all it does. It was just incredible. And he's distributed that in First Nations areas in Australia. Um, for me, like people that don't have very much are the most innovative people that I've ever come across, and it's amazing to see how people go about things. So, like I remember going to a refugee camp and I saw a Nutella chocolate jar or the equivalent chocolate spread um, being used as a shower head. You know, they were poking holes through it, and you know they were using it as a shower head. I've seen really interesting ways of people heating water. You know, they put 2 liter Coke bottles, fill it up with water, and put it on top of the roof, and that's how they heat their water.
Yeah. And I totally believe that. I think it's those people who are operating at the extremes know the most. Like I've talked to a lot of people about money, and those with the least money are the most innovative in the way you use it and how you manage it, because they work within the constraints and they find ways to stretch it. And, you know, they work out how you can use apps to do different things. What's the right way to balance things out? So I do think there's something really true about, you know, innovation comes from where you least think about it. And I love that you were talking about, you know, you've involved people throughout. How have you worked with women and girls as, you know, the end users throughout the process?
For us, it's about finding from the ground up who needs the machine. So we often spend a lot of time making sure that we have the right people in the process. So we do needs-based assessments firsthand, which kind of highlights need, whether it's finding out how people wash clothes, how much time do they use, where do they get their water from, do they feel pain, do they want a change? You know, these types of needs need to be kind of measured, and then on the back of that, we do like a priority matrix. So often female-led households, open to innovation, don't have access to a washing machine, disability in the household. These are kind of the typical things that we prioritize. And then we do a pilot, which is often 10 to 50 machines. And then we do a 6-month monitoring and evaluation survey. So that's the pilot stage. And then on the back of that, then we kind of grow and scale. And then we partner with people on the ground that have the trust of the community. They are familiar with the language. They have access to the people. So it's a kind of real co-developed, co-designed way of distributing machines. We don't just drop machines and go. So they're a part of the process on distribution. And then in terms of the design, you know, these guys are continuously feeding back to us. You know, an example of iterative innovation that we have is, you know, for example, one of the bottlenecks for our families were taking out stubborn stains. You know, they had to do repeat cycles for stubborn stains. So we integrated a washboard into the lid so that users can spot treat them immediately during the cycles. So no extra tools, no less water, like no water needed, and faster results. So we really depend on like short feedback loops, quick changes, and then go back into the field.
I love the fact that you talk about having someone who's part of the community, who's trusted as
Yeah.
part of, you know, the trial and everything. And I think, you know, it's interesting. Laundry has often been very social and communal, you know, whether it was women getting together or it was laundrettes. You know, how have you kept that sense of community alive in the work and the project?
For us, community is the way forwards. We can't do our work without community, and whether that's a community of partners, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, or you know, the community that use the machine. So for us, you know, often hand washing clothes is quite a shared activity. So we place washing machines in shared settings whether that's in kind of laundrettes, hospitals, schools. So the benefit kind of compound, there's more impact per machine. We measure basically one machine helps 100 people per week, essentially, in those contexts. We've also found, and we've got research that's been fed back to us, that public washing feels quite exposed. People are kind of embarrassed by that. There's often like a social penalty of that struggle that people are showing, and is on public display. So I think there's a side to it that people don't really know, and dignity matters in that instance. So our approach is to really understand the community, whether it's in-home washing that they want or a communal washing, and we'll kind of tailor to their needs.
Yeah, I love that. It's a device that the community can use, because we're so often we get them in our houses. They're individual devices. The fact that you've made it a communal thing again is great.
Yeah.
And shared around it, but it also still brings people together. And I know you said you've got the laundrettes. Like, what are you learning from the lessons at the laundrettes, and how is that used in a different way?
I think laundrettes in general have taught us, about usage and queuing and support and the insights associated to that, and how we can feed that back into our design. So, for example, in Greece, where migrants have come from so many places around the world, they find themselves on the shores of Europe. They find themselves in this refugee camp, migrant camp, and some of these people have gone through such hard, arduous journey. Some people have lost family members along the way. Some people haven't been home for months, if not years, and some people have had to, unfortunately, take boats to get to these places. I met someone that hasn't washed their clothes in 6 months, and the machine that was given to them in this laundrette had been available to them now, and he'd washed 4 times in 10 days. So it just goes to show that, if there's a solution available, readily available, people will come.
Yeah, and I think your point, it's not just clothes, it's dignity. It's about how you show up, it's your identity, it's how you feel as you go through the world. So it's not just about the fabric being clean, it's about how it makes that person feel as well. So I think that's really interesting. And I love your point about, even in London, we're seeing people going to laundrettes to connect, because people want those moments of intersection and something to talk about. And I think in other countries, it's laundrettes have become popular again, just as places where people can go and talk.
Spaces and places. Yeah, there's some interesting laundrette cafes that are coming up that we're keeping an eye on. And there's a whole business that you can create around this, a livelihood opportunity. And for us, like, innovation is really important, whether it's the product itself and making that as aspirational as possible, as easy to use and as ergonomic as possible, but also the service around it, and how can we build a service that is, easily accessible, can make money for the user, etc. A good example is Ford. Henry Ford didn't just build a car; he built the road for the car, and he built the petrol station to fill the car up. So it's a whole ecosystem that we're trying to push.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, I think it's so inspiring what you've built and the impact it's had. How can you partner with, corporates and humanitarian organizations to make this even bigger, to get it into more places? What does partnership look like, and what lessons have you learned?
Yeah, I think for us it's about co-creation, not donation. So, the best partners not only bring money, but they bring distribution, they bring local capability, they bring something that we don't have right now. I think for us, it's also about aligning incentives. So whether that's, tying a partner to a KPI, we have a big ambitious goal of reaching 1 million people by 2030. So, we can create a measurable outcome. It builds trust, builds brand recognition, and it builds employee engagement, and that's what partners want. And then we pilot on the small scale and scale fast, which is um, often what partners want. You know, they want to prove it works very quickly and then kind of grow from there. And some brands are quite quiet in their support, but the work still happens. You know, I think especially in this time right now in the US and the UK, where it's getting more difficult to sometimes support these causes publicly. You know, our partners are still supporting us, and that's really, really good to see.
And what lessons from your journey could apply to people in the wider innovation space in totally different fields? Like, what's your mantra, your manifesto for thinking about innovation?
I mean, the first one for us is that we always say fall in love with the problem, because the solution will always change. You know, solutions will and should always change, but problems will always be there, and that's really important for innovators. It's very transferable, I think. Ship, learn, iterate. You know, do that over and over again, and you'll get real world feedback, and that beats like lab perfection. You know, and the third final one is like just tell the story. You know, keep telling the story over and over again. Like just this morning, someone posted about us who said, you know, I have to admit, I've just heard about the washing machine project, and we've got over a couple of 100,000 followers now, and there's still people that are learning. So just keep telling the story.
Yeah, and I love the problem, fall in love with the problem. Like that's really important. I think your story of how you saw that problem, you know, in a real world context. How can people working in big corporations, you know, where can they go to get the problem? Is it about getting out there or meeting real people? Like, you know, so much of it now is done online, or it's, you know, through digital devices. Like, how important is it to just kind of go and see real people experiencing real tensions?
Yeah, I think it's about accessing people that have that lived experience. So whether that's people that are already operating the space, or you know, someone that's connected within your in group. You know, I'm sure there's employees that also have those lived experiences. You know, it was quite interesting with Whirlpool. We did a co-creation session with some of the employees, and some of them had come from overseas to the US, and they had experience of hand washing clothes. Their parents had the experience of washing clothes, and that's lived experience. And it's about kind of sitting down, listening, trusting those those voices, and then partner with people that are already, you know, the experts in that field.
Yeah, and I always remember I've done a lot of field work in Brazil and going to Sao Paulo and to going into homes and the pride at them having their first washing machine because their parents hadn't had them. And it was like, you know, they wanted us to go and see it, to go and look at it because it was a real step up of knowing that they, you know, they achieved something their parents couldn't. And, you know, you just think for us, so we expect it to be everywhere. When you see different cultures responding to just these, you know, the access to things, it really changes their lives. And I don't think we could talk today without talking about some of the powerful campaigns you've done to drive awareness of the washing machine project. I mean, you've done some very cool stuff to get attention. Do you want to share a bit about how storytelling has played into your growth?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when it comes to campaigns, we really want to create scroll stopping content. So, you know, storytelling is so important for us, whether it's like washing in the River Thames, or washing in Trafalgar Square's fountain, you know, washing outside the Parliament, you know, and then going to number 10 later. uh, these are important. Uh, uh, this is important content that will, you know, essentially cut the kind of tension between us and the viewer very quickly. It's informative and it's actionable. You know, we always say like donate, partner, and share. And you know, ultimately laundry is, you know, universal, but sometimes it's invisible, and campaigns like that like really bring it to people front and center.
Yeah. So what's next for the washing machine project? What are you planning? More products, new communities?
Yeah, I think for us it's all about scale now, getting to 1 million by 2030 as soon as possible. So more scale and more depth, so more community sites, whether it's schools, clinics, shelters, and then better kind of after sales and local repair ecosystems. There'll be new products coming out um, that are modular, that will help a range of people,
Yeah.
and we want to build more partners.
Yeah. And what can people do to help you achieve that goal of 1 million in 2030? How can people, brands, organizations, what support do you need? How can they get involved?
For us, we always say, whether it's an individual listening or a brand or an organization, like the most useful things that you can do are to share a story. It amplifies our reach and it builds trust with us. Brands and NGOs and partnerships, help us deploy our machines and and scale with us. And then, if you want to give, you can give directly to the washingmachineproject.org, and that all of that money will go to future development and deployment of machines.
And final question from me. If you could leave people one piece of advice about innovation and its impact, what would it be?
I think for us, it's about starting small. This was about, a promise to my next door neighbor. So start small with a real user insight and insight, and then create your constraints and keep your ego out of it, and then you'll build something really beautiful.